very much for joining us, everyone. I'd like to start by introducing the panel that we've got for you today. I'm sure you'll agree they're a fantastic panel to address the subject in front of us. So from the right, we've got Paul Frampton, who's the CEO of Havas Media Group in the UK. We've got Tim Warner, who's VP Insights and Analytics from PepsiCo, and Emily Sears, who's Head of Digital for Google Media Lab EMEA. So I think we've been talking up data as an industry for many years, but does the reality meet the hype? And as with most questions like this, I guess the answer is probably that it does to a degree. So we're going to take a look at what's going well and what we can steal with pride from these experts I've got sat alongside me and what they've learnt along the way. But I think it's also important to look at what's holding us back in the areas that are progressing less quickly. Is it about capability? Is it about a shortage of talent? Or maybe there are uncertainties caused by changes to the legal and regulatory environment. Or are brands just treading carefully as they work out the balance between hard-earned consumer trust and monetizing the data assets that they are sitting on? And perhaps above all, we really mustn't forget consumers. Are they getting enough out of it to continue to grant us permission to using their data? So they're the questions. We've got some great panelists here, and I'm going to start with a really basic question, I think. And if I start with Emily, please. How important is it to be leveraging data, and what are you doing about it?
Well, I would say that at Google, we feel it's very important. Probably no surprise to anyone in the audience that we're a very data-driven marketer. I think that we have a history of being being very good with data in certain areas. So we're obviously a search company at our core, and so we're very good with search and DR and that sort of shorter term view of advertising. But I think where we've been pushing and evolving and growing quite a bit is on the brand side of things, so having that longer term view. And I think that that's been not an easy road for us to walk as a marketer. So I sit on the marketing side of the house and work across all of our campaigns for EMEA. And when I joined Google 2.5 years ago, it was quite interesting to see how people were taking the perspective of looking at data from a DR lens, and we were taking that and applying that in some ways to our brand efforts. And so we've had a wholesale shift in the way that we've approached leveraging data across our brand campaigns in particular. And very interesting for Google to go in that direction, I think.
I mean, Tim, you've got some fantastic brands to work on. Does that resonate with you?
It does. When we're on a different journey, but a similar journey in that I think the first thing is that this whole space, data, insights, analytics, is just disrupting at such a pace. And whether it's clients or agencies, I think unless you kind of disrupt yourself, you're going to get disrupted. And I think the next kind of 2 or 3 years are going to be massively defining. But I guess as a PepsiCo organisation, we're relatively embryonic on the journey. I mean, for sure, we've been leveraging data forever, but I think it's only in the last couple of years that we've started to think about it in a really strategic, transformational way. And really born from the belief that even though there's kind of a negative bit here, which is for those who don't kind of disrupt, I think we're not going to survive. I think for those who can get ahead of the curve, there's a potentially massive source of competitive advantage. So that's our vision, which is how do we turn this into a competitive advantage, and how do we turn how we exploit data, and beyond data, insights and analytics more broadly, into a real growth accelerator. Beyond thinking very intentionally around how we do that, one of the big changes is we historically had quite a narrow focus of how we leverage data, whereas now we're really trying to say like end-to-end across the business, from strategy through to ideas, through to development, critically through to execution, which clearly for us is typically in a store, and then through to kind of in market. How do we really embed data insights at kind of every step of the journey into kind of key decision making to make decision making faster, smarter. So yeah, lots of parallels with Google. I'm actually going to be talking later, so I will show a few examples of some of those.
Yeah, it's 2:15.
Yeah, 2:15. So
plug in early.
Yeah, thank you. Better, good plug. But we've got some. There are some. I mean, whilst early, there were some definite wins. So we're not just in communication innovation, but across the piece, wins where already doing things differently, exploiting data in a very intentional way is just driving effectiveness and just allowing us to go to the market much quicker, to make smarter decisions. And I'll talk about it later, it's certainly not the panacea. There are lots of challenges with it, and it's not data. It has a role and a place, but...
Yeah, hopefully we'll come on to the challenges.
Exactly.
So, Paul, you must see this across a number of different clients. What are the different approaches you see?
Yeah, so at a macro level, I mean, in spite of the figures we just heard about growth, which is great news, marketing is there as an investment. I mean, it's there, as we all know, to grow businesses. And there's not a lot of growth in the market right now. We know GDP is fairly flat. We know marketing spend in general is fairly flat. So actually finding out what drives growth requires you to really understand actually what drives effectiveness. And there are so many businesses out there that do a good job of that. I mean, Google has obviously got it in its DNA. But there are businesses that are driving boom in a period when everyone else is flat. So the Amazons, the PayPals, the Googles, the Netflix of this world. And I think they've all got kind of two things in common. One is the fact that data is in their DNA. And they think about how data informs what they do, not just how they run their marketing, but how they develop their business, how they service their customers, how they develop their products. And secondly, and Havas runs a study called Meaningful Brands, which looks at how meaningful brands are rather than how valuable they are, so on personal and collective well-being. And a lot of those brands have jumped up in the last 2 or 3 years into that index because they are meaningful, because they deliver brilliant customer experience. So in actual fact, someone like Amazon gets to the very top of that list, and you would sit there and go, is Amazon a meaningful brand? Okay, tax, kind of staff welfare in their kind of factories, maybe not, but they provide an experience and a service that is so frictionless and so seamless that people think it's meaningful. They can't do without it. So if you ask people, would they care if Starbucks disappeared, 27% of people would care. If you ask them if Amazon would disappear, 74% of them care if it would disappear. So brands and customer experience, I think, are becoming very kind of interrelated, and I think data plays a critical role in understanding across your whole kind of marketing mix, whether that's owned, earned, paid, how do you connect that all together to deliver something meaningful to people? And there was a point about entertainment earlier. I think entertainment is a classically important part of that, part of the customer journey in the funnel, but equally utility is as important. And the example that was shown there, I guess, of a glossy kind of ad on YouTube works for a certain audience, but an influencer talking to a younger audience and thinking not just about the media and the targeting, but about the content that's delivered is one of the fundamental shifts that we're going to start to see. Is how does data, like Netflix looks at it, how does data inform the type of kind of places they put the game, but also the director they use, the type of thematics that they use. How does all of that get informed? And we've obviously just sat through a creative panel, and I wouldn't disagree with most of the things that have been said, and we talked about it before we came on, but the reality is we've got to find a better balance between these two things. Because I fundamentally do not believe that better data and insight could not inform better creativity. You're not taking anything away, it's about and rather than either or.
Great. And clearly, these are a number of reasons we've discussed then that why you might want to engage much more with data. If we start with you, Paul, what are some of the watch outs and the hurdles that you think people should be aware of as they start to engage more in this area?
So I think some of it's been talked about earlier. I think you have to come back to what is your purpose and what is your strategy, and then where data fits into it, as opposed to data sitting in a corner. Because I think data, technology, digital is everyone's job now in any organisation. It's not just the departments that are called that. And O2 have talked a little bit about that today, so have kind of John Lewis and Unilever. You've got to have an organisation that understands fundamentally that data and evidence and insight helps drive the whole piece. And I think that comes to actually engaging everyone in that conversation and demonstrating that actually what comes from a data-driven way of thinking can inform ideas and creativity as much as it can inform cost-cutting. Because we're all fearful of the word data because often it means cutting. But that shouldn't be the case. Data should be able to inform growth. And I think that's what the story of businesses like Google, Facebook, Amazon, PayPal demonstrate, that they can drive growth through that model.
Great. Tim?
I completely agree. I think that whilst you've given some great examples, I think the truth is the vast majority of organisations, big and small, are just skimming the surface in terms of how they're exploiting data. And I can share with you a few of the pitfalls, barriers, or I guess learnings I've got from PepsiCo, but I don't think that's specific to PepsiCo. The first, you've kind of mentioned it, there has to be in the DNA of that organisation, which means it has to start at the very top of belief that actually data can drive growth. It's not the panacea, but to your point, it has a role way beyond just cost cutting. It can inform, it can actually focus creativity, it can optimise, it can do a whole bunch of things. So unless there's that pull from the top of the organisation, I think you're hiding to nothing, frankly.
And is that an organisation design point?
Is it? I think it's, does the CA believe it? And clearly there are individuals in the organisation which they don't believe it, have a role to help them believe it. But fundamentally, I think there are different people, and there are some people who are deeply distrustful of data and see it as a barrier to creativity, see it as a barrier to instinct. There are others who go, actually, no, it can be an enabler, but it's, so I think without that kind of, I wouldn't join an organization unless I felt at the very top there was someone who had that belief, number one. Number two is, I think we have in the industry a real talent issue. You kind of referenced it earlier, and we've got a lot of people who are kind of like cliched, but left brain or right brain, and the two shall meet. And we fundamentally need to, I think, recognise that probably there aren't many people out there who can do everything. Who will not do everything. We've got to collect and cast a team that has got some different skills, but we've got to find where to mash those teams together, because at the moment, even if these teams exist, they tend to exist in splendid isolation and talk only when they're forced to talk. So there is a talent piece, there's a kind of team casting, there's kind of ways of working. I think there's a big piece around, one of the live conversations I'm having at the moment is, even if we build the capabilities that give us advantage data, and beyond data into analytics and insights, let's assume we can do that, and let's assume we can do that better than the competition. We'll only monetize that if we have an organization which is able and willing to respond to it. And that means a much more flexible organization which can almost reallocate and reposition itself internally as fast as things are happening externally. And I think that's the real challenge, particularly organizations which perhaps weren't built on a data foundation and have got a different legacy. How do you build a much more flexible organization which can just move, I don't say the speed of light, but can move in much more real time? And that's I think, the much bigger challenge, actually. I think you'll find quite a few organizations over the next 2 or 3 years that probably solve the data puzzle, but actually still get stuck in how the hell do we really leverage this, and how do we wire it into the day-to-day? That's the much tougher question.
And how would Google approach that?
I was going to say, I think we're almost the opposite of that. So we have immense flexibility, we can turn on a dime and go down a path that we think strategically makes sense, very much an engineering culture of, build and iterate and do it very quickly. I think where we struggle sometimes is that we have so much data at our fingertips, and we have so many people within the organization who are incredibly data savvy and incredibly prone to, people want to use data. It's very much accepted within our culture that everything should be founded in data. But I think, to go back to your, maybe it's not talent, but I think it's more of an education piece. So I think that spending time really educating our teams about how to look at data, how to read data, how to interpret various types of data, and also what data should be used when and where is something that's been really key for us. One of the things that we did about a year ago, we wrote a playbook for measurement in particular, because what we found was that we had so much data on how our campaigns were performing, especially on the brand side, that every campaign was being read differently. We were ascribing different success metrics in different cases, and so we, had to try to organize that to have more of a unified view of it across everything that we do, and also to get an apples-to-apples read on what's really working and what's not working. So I think education and building a strategy around that as an organization is really important.
Thanks. I mean, Paul mentioned earlier about data-informed growth, and I guess as we look at, as welcome as the spend figures were, we just heard, but as we look forward to probably fairly flat GDP, a lot of uncertainty in the economy, I imagine that this year's planning rounds are going to be interesting, and marketing effectiveness is going to be something that we all reach to. So, what do you think the role of data is in that?
So I think that's an area where we've taken a huge step forward in the last couple of years from a marketing perspective. I think, again, data, we used to think of it as something that would come at the end of a campaign or during a campaign and give us that chance to optimize and do better once something was in market. But we're getting a lot better now at leveraging data way before we even start to put a campaign brief together. So leveraging tools that we have access to as Google Marketing, but are also available to Google clients, like search data, YouTube Trends data, Google Consumer Surveys, bring all of that to bear as we're developing what the strategy for a product should be. I think is really key in that sense.
Great. Tim?
No, I mean, what you said is absolutely right. I think I can't imagine there are many organisations where this conversation isn't live and highly topical, and I think there are many organisations which are being asked to demonstrate how they can get more from less, or at a minimum, more from the same. Not dissimilar to Google, we're on a real journey in how we leverage data, analytics into the whole media chain, really, from audience insight, through to kind of media and channel selection and planning, through to real-time optimization, through to measurement, and then how we just really embed some of that learning into the system. If you can look at it, I don't know if any of you have seen the film Moneyball with Brad Pitt. For those who haven't, he's a GM of a baseball group in the US. And anyway, cut long story short, he applies data and analytics to how he turns the fortunes of this baseball team and wins the league. But we've almost taken Moneyball to our media spend, or in the approach of doing that, which is a phenomenal. We've got this massive, we spend billions, globally, and it's like, if you were a trader, an asset desk, you wouldn't be making some of the decisions probably historically lots of big advertisers make. You'd be much more thoughtful around the analytics you use, the research you use, etc. So we're trying to do that, but in a way where we're conscious that certainly the media landscape is evolving so rapidly that we need to have a much more of a test and learn mentality. So we have this approach called 70-20-10, which basically means how do we almost take the money, which the kind of core spend we put on media, and how do we really drive effectiveness and efficiency from that, so that actually we can then almost unlock 20 to 30% of money, which can be much more experimental. To some extent, sense the organisation, we're going to get from the 70% what we historically got from the 100% because we're doing it in a far more considered way. And actually then we make a number of bets, managed bets around the 20 and the 10. So we're kind of innovating around the kind of edge. Right. So, but no, it's moving frightfully fast, and it's quite difficult just to keep up with it. But it's gone from being something which was, I think, part of what we did to absolutely now front and centre.
Great. It sounds like a character-building time to be a media agency boss, Paul.
It sure is. But I also think it's a huge opportunity. Yeah. And I mean, some of it's just been talked about. I think the challenge is we've almost got to unlearn some of what we have grown up with in the last couple of decades around marketing. And we've got to break down the silos. I mean, you're talking about breaking down silos in the organisation, or creating a framework, some of which we showed earlier, around how these things connect different departments, because ultimately that analytics would have helped that team work, but also the teamwork would have. I mean, why did Leicester win the league last year? It wasn't because they on paper had the best players, but they delivered it as a single team. And if I sit and look at the number of departments and agencies I have in Havas Media Group, probably got about 10 or 11 different agency-facing brands. I would guess nearly 50 departments. The biggest challenge is about behaviour and a clear purpose to reimagine how all of that comes together. And there's a big pendulum that goes between integration and specialism, because clearly you need data scientists, but if the data scientists or programmatic experts live in one part of the building and never talk to our strategists and the ideas people, then we fail. And a lot of what Havas is trying to think about, and we're about to move all our agencies into one kind of single building in King's Cross next to Google actually, is how do we reimagine how this comes together? How do we change the behaviour and encourage generosity and collaboration so that we get the right people around the table? Because when you do, we've all seen it work. The problem is it only works in a small percentage of cases today.
And Tim, do you think you could talk us through the Pepsi approach as a legacy brand, the Pepsi approach to data and insights? So you start with embedded culture and beliefs, and you need to make this work. What was the approach, the vision? What were the early wins?
Listen, the truth is there wasn't a PepsiCo approach. The truth is PepsiCo is, for those of you who've ever worked on PepsiCo, was an incredibly decentralised organisation with very different operating units and very different cultures around the world. So there was 100 approaches. And they were formed by whoever the leader was and whichever organisation they came from. But that's changing rapidly, and as we define one approach. But we're still figuring it out, and the truth is the approach we take on a brand like Gatorade is different to approach we take on a brand like Lay's or Walker's. So it's not a one size fits all, but at the heart of it is how do we get incredible, call it what you want, consumer customer audience insight. I mean really, and we're working very hard to go beyond the kind of superficial to get the real deep visceral kind of understanding of our consumers as they relate to our categories, our brands, but just broader the world they live in, and really start to get under the skin of some of the tensions, the trade-offs. That's the heart, and in all the talk about data, let's not forget it's ideas that sell, it's ideas that grow businesses. Right? We can optimize ideas with data. We can make them better, but fundamentally we need amazing ideas. And I agree. I think data has a role in actually getting to great ideas, but as much creativity does, So a lot of the work of the data is actually how do we almost create the conditions in which creativity has more chance of being succeeding. Just roll the dice in your favour kind of thing. And then really that runs through. It's then, I love your point about behaviour. It's so true. We're trying to change the way we work from a classic big organisation, which is hierarchies and everyone isn't consulted and things take forever, to we're casting what we call SLAM teams, self-organising, lean, autonomous and multidisciplinary, which is a team of typically more than 4 or 5 people, clear problem to solve, clear tasks, they're empowered, they leverage, they're virtual teams around the world, they're leveraging technology, they're working very fast, and hence when we're bringing innovation to market, we're bringing new communications to market now, it's much more of a fast, iterative, prototyping approach than it was before, where it was a kind of gates and stages and, everyone's consulted and takes forever. So, and it's what we're trying to do is how do we embed insights into that so the whole thing is consumer-centric, and that almost success would be in a year's time. We're not even talking about data because it's just kind of what we do. Mm-hmm. It's just so kind of ingrained in what we do, and it's just part of kind of our culture.
And is that what Google's like? It's just what we do. Would you say it's different, being a brand that was born in the digital age?
Yeah, I think it's similar in some ways and different in others. So I think the shift to acceptance of data is not something that we've really had to go through as an organization. But I think conversely, we've had to do a lot of organization around and be very deliberate about how we use data. So a couple of the things we've done are form similar types of teams that are focused around specific areas around leveraging data. So we have a pretty robust analytics team that centrally manages all of our data that we use for Google marketing. So we can look at things across products, across regions, understand what's working and what's not. We also have a team, a data-driven creative practice that we've built out in the last year and a half, which we found that we were really struggling to bring data into creative itself, into the development process, and also build creative that spoke to somebody in the moment, that was very tailored and customized to an individual user. And I think that's where I'm ex-agency, I'm ex-WPP and Omnicom, and I know that coming from agency side, that's something that we've struggled with for a long time. And so building out that team where we have technical experts sitting right alongside creative directors and designers and copywriters, having that as one central team with a very clear focus to build these very moment-driven, data-driven units for us has been really key and has actually created some of the more impactful creative that we've been able to launch for our campaigns. But it's about being very deliberate about that and not just leaving it to chance, I think, and assuming that with all this data floating around, this will just naturally happen. You actually have to say, we're going to go out and do this.
Yeah, great. Now, Paul, we were talking earlier about some AI work you're doing with IBM Watson. Do you want to share some of that with the group?
Yeah, so firstly, I'm eternally grateful to Tom for explaining artificial intelligence and machine learning earlier. So I'm hoping most of you are here because I'm not going to attempt to explain it because I think he did a very good job. But so I think something like 90% of the world's data is unstructured and has been created in the last 2 years or something. It's a big number. I don't know the exact statistic, but it is a huge number, and it's only going to increase with the Internet of Things, with products having a digital kind of identity and us being able to capture that. So the ability to actually analyze and, to your point, kind of do something about data, to actually action it, is going to become harder and harder. So therefore, I think we need a better partnership between people and technology. And it isn't about kind of talent only or technology only, it's about the two coming together. And I think the thing is we fear technology and data a little bit, particularly certain people, because they fear it's going to take their jobs away. And actually what Tom showed, for any of you that are here, is that actually it just changes the role of people. It means that they spend less time on the delivery execution end, and they spend more time on the strategic ideas, kind of creating the future-facing strategy end, which I think is something that most of us would probably like to do. So we have developed a global partnership with IBM Watson, and they essentially take lots of unstructured data and then kind of analyze it in nanoseconds, analyze things like language, semantics, syntax, color, and use cognitive technology, so very similar to the brain. Some of you have probably heard that they played their computer against a human to play whatever the game was, the kind of game in the States, the kind of game show, and it won. Now, that is probably kind of a good example that technology can emulate or even improve against the human brain, but that's not really the point. I think the point is that there are pre-created kind of technologies that can be thrown at a problem, like a lot of unstructured data, like social data. All the data that's out there, you can throw Watson at it, and it'll start to tell you something on a very micro level, so that I can personalize something to you versus you, rather than having to deal in these big segments. So rather than having to be, we've got an audience segmentation, there are only 3 groups and they're pretty names, it could be lots of different experiences along a customer journey for different people. So let me give you an example. So an example would be for Adidas My Way, which is some work that Helia, one of our agencies, did. And essentially they plugged social login data in, so pulling your data from Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, all of those places, which pulls obviously your profile as well as your engagement history. And then it started to analyse the language, the syntax, the engagements, and it started to identify which Adidas brand ambassador was most relevant to different audiences. So it started to change the targeting, where we would reach those people, but also change the ambassador that was in the ad, and that ad was created on the fly dynamically, the colours that that person was most engaged with when they engaged with content previously, the language, etc., etc. So I use that Netflix analogy of data should inform both the media targeting tools, technology, and the content side of it. And right now, our industry is set up whether those things are very separate. We've almost got all of the ingredients and tools to be able to deliver this stuff today. Watson's another great example. But if we don't have the teamwork and the behaviour around it, we'll never be able to deliver that. And that is essentially like service design. Another example for a manufacturer of condoms was creating a chatbot that actually mimicked a human going in and having conversations, listened to those conversations, and was able to pick up confidence levels, was able to pick up similar questions that had been asked previously to deliver customer service better. Now, that's something that's almost impossible to scale with individuals, and you could argue that may take some humans out of the mix, but if technology can help to take away some of that heavy lifting and actually give you human understanding through technology, insight that you can act on, I would argue that technology then empowers us to be more human and to actually deliver better experiences to people and make brands more meaningful. So rather than it being a friction point or something to fear, it should be something to embrace.
And where does the group think that consumers are on that? Because I think it is one thing, perhaps, to have creative informed by all that data, and we've seen different colours being used and propositions being made more relevant by the things we can get from social behaviour and profiles. But I don't know if any of you saw The Guardian this morning, but Admiral have announced a trial, and you opt into it and your price can only go down. But they are using that data to inform the price you pay for insurance. I mean, is that something consumers are going to be happy with?
I think we're only at the very start of that journey. I think implicitly, if there's a value exchange in it, then consumers tend to find out. So the Amazon example or Google example or Facebook example, those products and services are provided ultimately free. And there is a value exchange. I think more people are aware of the fact that they are giving something to get access to something, and therefore there is some trade-off. However, I think the same thing comes back to relationships between agencies and brands. The visibility and the transparency of how all of that works is not there. Now, if you ran lots of sessions to educate people, consumers on that, they probably wouldn't go to them because there's no benefit to them. But somehow, we've got to get better at actually meeting their expectations and showing that if you share data, then you get a better experience or a value. And we started that with loyalty experiences and with CRM. But in principle, all touch points potentially could be an opportunity to delight, or even for serendipity, which I often find people say, well, you can't deliver something unexpected if you're going to use data. I wouldn't buy that, actually, because it should give you the ingredients to then work out when to bubble something beautiful up to someone. Yeah. And the same piece of creative could still be there, but with a bit of information that you didn't have, you might get that moment, to your point, that moment you might get absolutely precision right.
Great. Tim, any views?
So I think ultimately, if you can use data to find a way to connect a brand or a service to a consumer and work out what that consumer really wants and personalise it, that's got to be a good thing, yeah? I think, so if I look ahead 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, I have to think that's a good thing, and I have to think net there's going to be value for everyone. I think the journey there will probably have some bumps in the road, and I think that there will be some issues, and there will be, some of this is implicit, some of it's more explicit, so I think it's going to be bumpy, but ultimately, there's a lot of waste at the moment. There's a lot of stuff that consumers do, we do, that frankly gives no value to anyone. If you can eliminate that waste and fundamentally make something that you really want versus you, then I can only see that as a good thing. I think it's more a case of how we do that, and how we do that in a way which is transparent and tells the story, but in a way which kind of is simple and doesn't confuse. But overall, I think there's only one way it's going to go, if I'm honest.
I guess, Emily, you'd argue that Google have built a business on this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the point about there being a value exchange is really important. I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think one of the campaigns where we've tried to really do that is around the Google search app. So we could go out and just have a very generic message about what the Google search app is and different features that you can find within the app, et cetera. But in the past, what we've always tried to do is be very targeted within the moment and try to surprise and delight people. So we ran banners during the Euro Cup this past summer where we're dynamically pulling in what games were happening and showing people that they could ask when the next game was happening, and location targeted to show the games that were most relevant to the people in that country or in that area. Showed translations based on, again, the two teams that were playing with each other, so you could translate key phrases and things like that. And I think that all of that obviously has to be enabled by data in the moment. And we've seen that those types of campaigns and those types of assets have much better performance. So I think there's data to be used to make that happen, but there's also the flip side of it is having the data to understand when that actually does work versus something else. And to your point about cutting waste, I also think there's a lot more that we, and I think Google has this view holistically, a lot more we should be doing to use data to inform what types of formats of communication people really value, what types of messages within those formats people really value. We're working on some ad annoyance research right now, so looking at effectiveness of ads versus how much they annoy people, because we don't want to annoy our audience. We want to deliver something that they find valuable, and if we see that there's a high level of annoyance in something we're doing, we want to cut that out. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for marketers to get smarter using data about the messages we deliver, but also the venues in which we deliver those messages.
Thank you. Right, I think we've got a couple of minutes left between now and your lunch. So has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask to this panel while we've got them?
We have another session after this. It's not quite lunch yet.
Oh, sorry. Well, I've got to rush off, so it's my lunch after this. So I can tell you briefly that at 2:15 we're going to do a deep dive with Tim into the Pepsi case study, and we're also going to be hearing from Havas about their work with IBM Watson, and that's at 2:15. So is there any questions? I couldn't see. Yeah, there's one there.
I think you've mentioned Colin Wheeler from AMEC, Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Comms, not the engineering business. You mentioned about using data and insight to inform maybe when you show something to a target or how you might get to something that's an interesting idea. But do you ever see the role for data being an actual positive inspiration for a creative concept? Because my view is that absolutely it should be, but I just kind of wondered, in your experience, have you seen that?
Yeah.
You also take that?
Do you want to go first, Emma?
Yeah, I think that I think that's 100% right. I would 100% agree with you. I think the concept of a concept is eroding a bit in my mind. So we have a strategy, and then we would deliver comms that line up with that strategy. And so data is often what gets us from the strategic need of the product or service that we're trying to market to what those comms need to be. But a concept for us is kind of eroded a little bit because I think a lot of teams marketers equate that with a TV spot, right? Or a longer form video that has your anthem in it. And we're starting to either get away from that or start to look at the entire suite of comms that we're providing. And so, what we do on YouTube or what we do on Snapchat or what we do on through programmatic enabled ads on mobile devices, all of that has to wrap up under that strategy. And so, yeah, I think data inspires each and every one of those touch points, but it's less about the single concept, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Right, well, we are out of time, so 10-second response each.
So I would say that absolutely. So we run this round table kind of briefing for big briefs within Havas, and we invite the media people, the creative people, creative directors, but also kind of people from the programmatic team, social team. And the teams that have actually got their data just encouraged to turn up with two things that nobody else knows. Just tell people something that nobody else knows from that data. Don't go into 50 slides of PowerPoint about it. Just put something on the table and say, we just found this out. And it starts to change the conversation a little bit. I would say it's very nascent. It certainly hasn't been systemised to being perfect, but it changes our ability to challenge the brief, because media agencies particularly are bad at going, right, here's the brief, what do I now do in channels, as opposed to, is the brief even right? And is the audience we're going after even right? And some of the time, data actually allows you to challenge the start point and go back and be, we can be a partner as opposed to just a provider of media.
Tim?
100%, yes, I got.
You're much more concise.
No, a number of examples. I'll talk later, so yeah, 100% yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much.